The night my life changed forever did not start with thunder or rain. It started with the sound of my father screaming that I was a mistake. He grabbed my project file, the one I had worked on for months, and slammed it so hard against the wall that every page exploded into the air like broken pieces of my future. My mother didn't try to stop him. She clapped, laughing at me as if destroying my dreams was entertainment. I stood there, frozen, my chest burning, my hands shaking, my entire world collapsing in seconds. That night should have destroyed me completely, but instead, it planted a seed of fire inside me that none of them could ever put out. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Scarlett. I was born in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, but no one knew the truth about mine. From the outside, my family looked normal. A father with a decent job, a mother who smiled in public, a daughter who went to school and tried her best. But inside the walls of our house, everything was different. I was treated like a parasite, a mistake that shouldn't exist. My parents believed I was wasting their money, their space, even their air. No matter what I did, it was never enough for them. When I was a child, I believed that if I worked hard, they would love me. I studied late at night, drawing and writing projects, hoping that one day they would be proud. But every time I showed them my work, it ended the same way with insults, anger, or laughter. My father used to tell me, "Your dreams are useless. People like us don't rise." My mother would add, "You'll end up nothing just like everyone else." They thought these words would make me obedient, but instead, they turned into knives that cut deeper every year. That night when they destroyed my final project, I felt something break inside me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought maybe they were right, maybe I was wasting my time. But then something else rose inside me, an anger so strong it felt like fire rushing through my veins. I looked at the pieces of my project scattered on the floor and made myself a silent promise. This is not my end. This is my beginning. I didn't say those words out loud. I didn't argue with them. I stood there quietly while my father stormed off and my mother kept laughing. Silence became my shield. Because I realized something that night. Silence makes them believe they've won, but inside, silence can also be the loudest scream of all. I picked up the broken pieces of paper and hid them in my room. Some pages were torn, some destroyed, but I kept them all. They weren't just papers anymore. They were reminders of who I was, of what I needed to become. I stayed awake the whole night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my parents laughing downstairs as if my pain was a comedy show. That sound burned into my memory, and I told myself, one day this laugh will turn into silence. One day, they will watch me and regret every word. Growing up, I never had anyone to support me. At school, I was the quiet one, the girl who sat in the corner with her notebooks filled with dreams no one cared about. Some classmates tried to talk to me, but the moment they realized my family had a reputation for being harsh and cold, they stayed away. I got used to being alone. Loneliness became my normal, my comfort zone. But inside that loneliness, I was building something no one could see. Sometimes, I would lock myself in the school library after classes. I read stories about people who came from nothing and still changed the world. Those stories were like oxygen to me. They reminded me that my pain was not the end. It was just the beginning of a journey. But every time I came home, that hope would fade again because my parents would crush it with their words. I remember once when I was 13, I drew a picture of a city skyline at night. I worked on it for days. When my father saw it, instead of saying anything kind, he tore it in half and said, "You think this nonsense will feed you? Stop acting like you're special." My mother laughed and said, "Maybe if you stop dreaming, you'll finally be useful." That was the first time I felt my chest physically hurt from their words. It wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical pain. But what they didn't know was that every time they tried to break me, they were only pushing me closer to the fire that was growing inside me. Slowly, I stopped hopping for their approval. I stopped waiting for them to say they loved me. Instead, I started saving all that energy for myself. By the time I was 17, I had learned to live two lives. In one life, I was the obedient daughter, silent, listening to their insults, keeping my head down. In the other life, I was the dreamer, working in secret, writing down my ideas, sketching, studying late at night when they thought I was asleep. I knew I couldn't fight them directly. I wasn't strong enough yet. but I could prepare myself for the day when I would finally leave. That night, when my project was destroyed, was the breaking point. I realized my entire childhood had been leading up to that moment. If I gave up, their words would be true forever. If I stood up, even silently, I could rewrite the story. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I had to start. The next day at school, my teacher asked me why I looked so tired. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. I simply said, "I had a rough night." He nodded, but I saw something in his eyes, maybe pity, maybe understanding. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had decided not to let my parents define me anymore. I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't I just run away? Why didn't I shout back at them? The truth is, sometimes silence is more powerful than words. Sometimes patience is the sharpest weapon. I was waiting. I was learning. And one day I was going to use everything they threw at me as fuel. But before I tell you how my life started to change, I want you to know this. Pain is not the end. Pain can be the beginning of something much bigger. That night, in the broken pages of my project, I found the fire that would carry me through everything that came next. This was only the start of my story. What came after was darker, harder, and even more painful, but it was also the road that led me to the person I am now. And if you are listening to me right now, maybe it's because you too have felt that kind of pain, that kind of betrayal. If you have, then you'll understand why I couldn't give up. Because giving up would mean they were right, and I was not going to give them that victory. After that night, nothing looked the same to me anymore. I still woke up in the same house, saw the same walls, heard the same voices, but everything inside me had shifted. My father's anger and my mother's laughter had already done their damage, but now, instead of crushing me, it was shaping me into something they didn't expect. I was no longer waiting for them to love me, no longer trying to earn their approval. I had finally realized that their voices didn't define me. My silence, my choices, my fire would define me. But it wasn't easy. The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. Every day felt like walking through fire. My parents continued their routine of insults. My father would call me lazy even when I worked all day. My mother would compare me to other children, telling me how everyone else was smarter, prettier, more successful. They believed their words were breaking me down, but the truth was, they were only hardening me. Every insult became a brick in the wall I was building inside my mind. A wall that would protect me until I could finally escape. At school, I carried that weight with me. I sat at the back of the classroom, pretending to take notes, but most of the time I was lost in my own thoughts. I used to wonder, why me? Why was I born into this family? But slowly I stopped asking that question. Instead, I started asking myself, what can I do with this pain? How can I use it? That small change in thinking made all the difference. One afternoon, while I was sitting in the library, I saw a book lying open on the table. The title was The Phoenix Rises. It was about myths, stories of creatures that die in fire and are reborn stronger. I didn't even know who left it there, but when I read it, something clicked inside me. That was me. I was in the fire, but I was not going to burn forever. One day, I would rise from it. I kept repeating those words to myself. Every night, when I heard my parents fighting or mocking me, I whispered in my mind, I am the fire. I will rise. Still, there were moments when the weight became unbearable. I remember one evening when I was working on a secret sketch in my notebook. My brother, who was rarely home but carried the same cruel spirit as my parents, barged into my room. He grabbed my notebook, flipped through the pages, and smirked. "You think anyone cares about this garbage? No wonder Mom and Dad hate your guts." Then he tore out a page and crumpled it. That moment almost broke me again. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight back, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took the notebook back, closed it, and said nothing. On the outside, I looked weak. On the inside, I was stronger than ever. Because I knew something he didn't know, I was already planning my way out. I didn't have money. I didn't have support. But I had time and I had willpower. I started teaching myself skills in secret. Whenever I could get access to the school's old computer lab, I would sit there for hours, learning, reading, practicing. Sometimes I sketched designs, sometimes I studied business ideas, sometimes I just wrote my thoughts down. It didn't matter what I did, as long as I was preparing myself for the day I would finally step out of that house. But life wasn't done testing me yet. One evening, something happened that almost killed the small hope I had left. My school was hosting a science fair, and I had worked for weeks on a model of a solar-powered machine. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was proof that I could create something meaningful. When I carried it home to practice, my father saw it and asked, "What is this useless piece of junk?" I stayed silent, hoping he would just ignore it. But instead, he grabbed it and smashed it on the floor, pieces scattering everywhere. My mother stood by the door and said, "See, this is what happens when you waste your time. No one will ever care about you." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just picked up the broken parts of my project and put them in a box. My hands were bleeding from the sharp edges, but I didn't care. Because in that moment, I realized something very important. Every time they tried to destroy my work, they were only proving how afraid they were of what I could become. If I was truly useless, they wouldn't feel the need to break me again and again. Their cruelty was proof of my potential. And so I began to change. My silence was no longer just survival, it was strategy. I stopped reacting, stopped giving them the satisfaction of seeing me in pain. I acted like I didn't care, but inside, I was writing down every word, every insult, every laugh. I was storing it all, waiting for the day when I would use it as fuel to prove them wrong. During this time, I also began to notice something about myself. My strength wasn't just in creating things, it was in enduring, in adapting. While other kids my age worried about parties or grades, I was building an armor no one could see. I was learning how to take hits and still stand up. I was learning how to turn silence into power. And even though I was still trapped in that house, I was already free in my mind. But the world outside didn't know my struggle. Teachers saw me as quiet, classmates saw me as strange, neighbors saw me as the shy girl who never spoke much. None of them knew the battles I fought every day in my own home. Sometimes I wished someone would notice, someone would ask if I was okay. But when no one did, I taught myself the hardest lesson of all: sometimes you can only save yourself. Looking back now, I realize those years were training. Training for pain, for resilience, for patience. Every broken project, every insult, every tear I held back was shaping me into someone who could survive anything. And though I didn't know it yet, I was getting closer to the moment when my life would finally change for real. Because soon, I would face the darkest betrayal yet, one that wouldn't just test my patience, but would push me to the edge of who I was. It would come from someone I thought I could trust, and it would almost destroy me. But that betrayal was also the spark that lit the fire I had been building inside for years. And when that fire finally burned, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I told you before that silence became my shield, but silence alone was not enough. I needed something more, something that belonged only to me. That was when I began to find my hidden passion. While the world thought I was wasting away in my small room, I was building a secret life inside those four walls. I discovered that I loved creating things that came from nothing: sketches, small inventions, even simple notebooks filled with ideas. Every time I picked up a pen or a tool, it felt like I was breathing again. In those moments, I was Scarlett, the useless daughter. I wasn't the girl my parents mocked. I was someone with vision, someone who could see beauty and possibility where others only saw trash. But keeping that passion alive was dangerous. My family had already proven that anything I created, they would try to destroy, so I kept my work hidden. I tucked my notebooks under loose floorboards, hid sketches inside old textbooks, stored broken pieces of small projects inside a box under my bed. No one could know, not even my classmates. My secret was my lifeline, and if anyone took it away, I didn't know if I would survive. One day, when I was 15, I met a girl named Claire at school. She was different from everyone else. She didn't laugh when others mocked me. She didn't avoid me like I was invisible. Instead, she sat next to me in the library and asked, "Why are you always so quiet?" At first, I didn't answer. I wasn't used to people caring about my silence, but something in her eyes felt safe. Slowly, I began to trust her. I didn't tell her everything, but I shared small pieces. I showed her one of my sketches, and instead of laughing, she whispered, "This is amazing. You're talented, Scarlett." Those words almost broke me because they were so rare, so different from what I usually heard. For the first time, I thought maybe I wasn't completely alone. Maybe I had someone who believed in me. Claire became my closest friend. She gave me the courage to dream a little louder, to work a little harder. Sometimes she even stayed with me after school to help with my projects. She said she admired my determination, how I never gave up even though life kept knocking me down. With her around, I felt stronger. I thought I had finally found someone who wouldn't betray me, but I was wrong. The betrayal came slowly, disguised as friendship. At first, Claire would compliment my work, but then she started asking if she could borrow my notes or my sketches just to get inspired. I didn't mind at first. I wanted to believe she truly respected me. But one afternoon, I walked into the school auditorium and froze. Claire was standing on stage, holding up one of my designs as if it were her own. Teachers and students were clapping, praising her for her creativity. My heart sank. I wanted to scream that it was mine, but the words caught in my throat. I just stood there, invisible, watching someone else receive the recognition I had dreamed of for years. That night, I cried harder than I ever had before. Not because she stole my work, but because I had let myself believe in someone. I had let my guard down, and she had cut me deeper than even my parents ever did. Betrayal from family was expected. Betrayal from the only person I trusted, it almost destroyed me. For days, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like a fool. But once again, pain turned into fire. And this time, the fire was brighter than ever. I told myself something important. If my work is good enough to be stolen, then it means it has value. If people can use my creations to rise, then I can rise higher than all of them. That thought saved me. I wiped my tears, picked up my pen, and started again. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't expose her. Instead, I used her betrayal as a lesson. Trust is dangerous. Silence is safer. Work in the shadows until the world has no choice but to see you. So I built my secret passion even deeper. I started sketching bigger projects, writing stories, creating designs that no one had ever seen before. Late at night, when my parents thought I was asleep, I was awake, building a different version of myself. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but I kept going. Every insult from my father, every laugh from my mother, every betrayal from Claire, I turned them all into fuel. One night, while I was working, I whispered to myself, one day they will regret everything. One day I will walk away from all this, and they will realize what they lost. I didn't know how or when, but I knew that day would come. And then something happened that proved I was moving closer to that future. Our school announced a regional competition, an opportunity for students to present innovative projects. Winners would get scholarships and recognition. At first, I hesitated. What if my parents found out? What if Claire stole from me again? But then, a stronger voice inside me said, "This is your chance, don't hide forever." I began working in secret. I used scrap materials, broken electronics I found in the trash, old notebooks filled with my designs. Slowly, I built something small but powerful, an idea that combined energy and design in a way no one else had thought of. Every night I worked, I heard my parents' voices in my head, mocking me, but instead of stopping, their voices pushed me harder. When the day of the competition came, I was terrified. My hands shook as I carried my project into the hall. Claire was there too, smiling at me like nothing had happened. She probably thought I wouldn't dare to compete against her. But this time, I was ready. I presented my project, my voice trembling at first, but then growing stronger as I spoke. For the first time, people listened. For the first time, I felt seen. The judges praised my work, saying it was creative and original. I didn't win first place, but I didn't need to. I won something more important, proof that I wasn't useless. Proof that my ideas mattered. That day when I walked home, I held my head a little higher. My parents still mocked me when they found out. "So what if you didn't win? You're still a loser," my father said. My mother laughed. But inside, I didn't care, because now I knew the truth. Their words were lies. That competition was a turning point. It showed me that the world outside my house was bigger than the prison I lived in. It showed me that even if my parents didn't believe in me, others could see my worth. And most importantly, it reminded me that I was not powerless. I had a gift, and no amount of cruelty could erase it. But life wasn't done testing me. The betrayal from Claire was only the beginning. Soon, I would face challenges even greater, moments that would push me to the very edge of survival. But no matter how dark it became, I kept repeating the same words in my heart. I am the fire. I will rise. After the competition, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the same quiet Scarlet anymore. Even though I didn't win first place, I had tasted what it felt like to be heard, to be recognized, and I wanted more. For the first time, I felt like the fire inside me was no longer just a secret flame. It was growing, spreading, becoming something I could no longer hide. But that little victory also came with a cost. My parents noticed the change in me. They saw that I wasn't as broken as before, and it scared them. Instead of ignoring me, they grew harsher, crueler, as if they needed to crush me all over again. Every evening turned into a battlefield. My father would wait for me at the dinner table, ready with his sharp words. "So, genius, what's your next failure? When are you finally going to give up this nonsense?" My mother would laugh in agreement. Sometimes they threw my notebooks in the trash, sometimes they ripped my sketches. They were desperate to remind me that I was nothing. But what they didn't understand was that every attack was only sharpening me. Still, I was human. Their cruelty hurt. No matter how strong I tried to be, I had moments when the pain felt unbearable. The real breaking point came one night when I thought things couldn't get any worse. I had been working on a personal project in secret for months. It wasn't for school, it wasn't for anyone, it was for me. I had poured every ounce of my soul into it. It was a design for something I dreamed could one day change lives, a machine that combined art and science in a way I had never seen before. I kept it hidden under my bed, wrapped carefully in cloth, safe from their eyes, or so I thought. That night I came home from school exhausted. I walked into my room and froze. The cloth was gone. My secret project lay scattered across the floor, broken into pieces. My father stood in the corner, holding one of the parts in his hand like it was trash. "So this is what you've been hiding, wasting electricity and time on this garbage." My heart stopped. Before I could say anything, he dropped the part and stomped on it, crushing it under his boot. My mother clapped her hands and laughed. "Good job. Finally, you're teaching her what real life is." I don't remember how long I stood there. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like my entire world had collapsed in that single moment. All the nights I had stayed awake, all the hope I had poured into that project, all the fire I had used to keep myself alive, it was gone. Destroyed. I ran to the broken pieces, falling to my knees, trying to put them back together, but it was useless. My hands trembled as I picked up each shattered part. My father walked out, satisfied, while my mother's laughter echoed in the hallway. That night I reached my lowest point. For the first time in my life, I thought about giving up completely. I sat in my room, staring at the broken pieces, and asked myself, what's the point? Why keep fighting when everything I build is destroyed? Why keep dreaming when every dream turns to dust? The silence in my room was heavy, pressing down on me, suffocating. For hours, I couldn't move. I thought maybe they were right, maybe I really was nothing. But then something strange happened. As I sat there in the dark, my eyes landed on one small piece of my broken project. It was a shard of glass from the frame I had used, and in it, I saw my reflection. My face was streaked with tears, my eyes swollen, but behind the pain, I saw something else, anger. A deep, burning anger that refused to die. I realized that if I gave up now, if I let this moment break me, then their laughter would win forever. And I couldn't let that happen. I whispered to myself, this is not the end, this is the beginning. My voice was shaky, but the words grew stronger each time I repeated them. That night, I made a decision. I would stop waiting for them to change. I would stop hoping they would love me. From that moment on, everything I did was not for them, not for anyone else. It was for me. I would build my future with my own hands, even if it killed me. The next morning, something about me was different. I still looked the same, still quiet, still obedient, but inside I was no longer the same Scarlet. I was done being their victim. I started observing them carefully, not as my parents, but as obstacles. Every insult, every attack became data, something I could use to learn how to survive. I started planning, step by step, how I would one day leave this house and never come back. I focused on school more than ever, not because I cared about grades, but because knowledge was my weapon. I spent hours in the library, not just reading what was assigned, but everything I could get my hands on: science, business, psychology, survival stories. I wanted to understand how people who had nothing built everything. I studied their lives like a blueprint for my own. But even as I grew stronger inside, my parents didn't stop. One evening, after another fight, my father shouted, "You will never have a future, Scarlet. You don't deserve one." My mother laughed and said, "The world doesn't need people like you." Their words cut deep, but this time, instead of breaking me, they fueled me. I repeated their words in my mind, twisting them into motivation. They don't think I deserve a future. Then I will create one so bright that it will blind them. Still, I won't lie to you, it wasn't easy. Some nights I cried myself to sleep, muffling the sound so they wouldn't hear. Some mornings I woke up with no energy, feeling like I couldn't keep going. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that shard of glass, my reflection, my promise. I remembered the fire. That breaking point, watching my secret project destroyed, was the hardest moment of my life, but it was also the most important, because it killed the last piece of me that still hoped for their love. And once that piece was gone, I was free. Free to stop begging, free to stop waiting, free to start building my own path. What I didn't know then was that my path would not be simple. The world outside was waiting with its own challenges, its own betrayals. But I was ready now. I had faced the worst inside my own home, and I had survived. From here on, no matter what came my way, I would not be broken again. Because that night, in the ruins of my destroyed project, Scarlet was reborn. After that night when my secret project was destroyed, I knew something inside me had died, but at the same time, something far stronger had been born. I stopped expecting anything from my parents. I stopped hoping for kindness, stopped waiting for love. Instead, I became quiet, watchful, and patient. On the outside, I still looked like the same silent Scarlet who obeyed and stayed in her room, but inside, I was changing. My mind was no longer just a place for dreams. It was turning into a weapon. Every insult, every moment of humiliation, every cruel laugh from my mother or every sharp word from my father became fuel for me. They thought I was becoming weaker, but really, I was only sharpening myself in silence. I started waking up earlier than anyone else in the house. At 5 in the morning, while the world was still dark and silent, I would sit near the small window in my room with an old notebook I had saved from the trash. I filled page after page with ideas, sketches, plans. I wrote about the future I wanted, the life I would build. At first, the words were shaky, almost like whispers to myself, but slowly they grew stronger like a promise. I knew I couldn't build everything right away, but I could prepare. And preparation became my obsession. At school, I stopped caring about fitting in. I didn't waste energy on people who mocked me or called me weird. Instead, I watched. I observed how students who succeeded carried themselves, how they spoke, how they studied. I noticed what teachers rewarded, what skills opened doors. I began to treat every day as training. If a subject was hard, I didn't avoid it. I forced myself to learn. If something scared me, I leaned into it. Fear became my compass. One day in the library, I found a book about survival stories. People who had nothing, who lost everything, yet found a way to rise. I devoured every page. I read about inventors who were laughed at, leaders who were doubted, survivors who had walked through fire and come out stronger. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. Pain wasn't just mine, it was universal. And if they could rise from it, so could I. That realization became a shield I carried with me everywhere. Of course, my parents noticed little changes. They noticed how I no longer argued, how I no longer reacted when they tried to hurt me. They would scream, I would stay silent. They would laugh, I would look back with steady eyes. At first, it made them feel powerful, but soon I could sense their discomfort. My silence bothered them more than my words ever had. They couldn't break what no longer resisted, and that gave me strength. Still, I needed more than inner strength. I needed skills, something real that no one could take away from me. So I began learning in secret. I found free resources online in the school library, tutorials, lectures, anything I could access. Late at night, while they thought I was asleep, I used a small second-hand phone I had hidden away to study. Coding, design, business, psychology, I devoured it all. Every bit of knowledge felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was building in silence. I remember one night, as I watched a video about building resilience, the speaker said, "Your pain is not your prison, it is your power." Those words hit me so hard I wrote them down and taped them to the wall behind my bed. Every morning, those words were the first thing I saw. Every night, they were the last thing I whispered to myself before sleep. I also began to train my emotions. I realized that anger, if left uncontrolled, would destroy me the same way my parents tried to. So instead of screaming, I wrote. Page after page of my notebook became filled with letters I would never send, stories I would never share, secrets that belonged only to me. Writing became my therapy, my release. Slowly, I learned how to transform anger into focus. Every time I wanted to cry, I wrote. Every time I wanted to scream, I studied. Pain became my teacher. There were moments when I slipped, times when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the weight of silence crushed me. I remember one night sitting on the floor, hugging my knees, feeling like a ghost in my own house. But then I reminded myself, this was temporary. This house was not my forever. My real life was waiting outside these walls, and every day I prepared was one step closer to my escape. That thought kept me alive. Months turned into a year, and slowly I began to see results. My grades improved, not just a little, but dramatically. Teachers who once ignored me started to notice. "Scarlett, you've changed," one of them said. I smiled politely, but inside I thought, no, I didn't change. I just stopped letting myself die. With better grades came opportunities. I got access to competitions, workshops, and projects. Even when my parents tried to block me, I found ways around it. If they refused to sign a form, I forged it. If they hid information, I asked my teachers directly. I learned how to bend rules without breaking them. Each small victory felt like proof that I could outsmart the cage they had built for me. But transformation isn't just about success. It's about failure too. There were times when I tried something and failed miserably. I lost competitions, I embarrassed myself in presentations, I stumbled in front of people. Each failure stung, but I treated them like training wounds, scars that made me stronger. Every time I failed, I whispered, "Good. Now I know what not to do next time." At home, nothing changed. My parents were still the same. My father still shouted, my mother still laughed. But the difference was me. Their words no longer entered my soul. They bounced off the armor I had built inside. They were still cruel, but I was no longer weak. And though they didn't realize it yet, the more they tried to crush me, the stronger they made me. By the end of that year, I had built something they could not see. A version of myself that was no longer afraid, no longer begging for their approval. I had turned my pain into discipline, my silence into strategy, my fire into focus. I was still trapped in their house, but my mind was already free, and soon my body would follow. Because my transformation was not just about surviving anymore, it was about preparing for the day I would rise. The day they would look at me and realize they had not created a weak, broken daughter. They had created the very force that would one day leave them behind. And when that day came, I promised myself I would never look back. When my grades kept rising and teachers started praising me, it was like cracks forming in the walls my parents had built around me. They wanted me invisible, small, silent. But slowly I was becoming visible in ways they couldn't control. One day after class, my science teacher stopped me in the hallway and said, "Scarlett, there's a state-level competition coming up. I think you'd be perfect for it." At first, I hesitated, afraid of what my parents would say. But then I remembered the promise I had made to myself, that I would never let fear decide my future again. So I nodded and said yes. That one yes changed everything. Preparing for the competition was brutal. I had limited resources, no support at home, and constant obstacles. But I had one thing stronger than all of that: hunger. I wanted to prove to myself that all the nights of silence, all the mornings of hidden study meant something. I stayed after school to work in the lab, telling my parents I was stuck in extra classes. When they questioned me, I lied with a straight face. That was the first time I realized that sometimes survival meant deception. I wasn't lying to hurt them. I was lying to protect the only thing that mattered: my future. The day of the competition arrived. I walked into the large hall filled with students from all over the state, each carrying their projects proudly, surrounded by supportive parents and teachers. I walked in alone. No one stood beside me, no one cheered my name. For a moment, I felt the old loneliness crawl up my throat. But then I reminded myself, you are enough. You have always been enough. That thought became my anchor. When my turn came to present, my hands trembled at first. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, mocking me, telling me I was worthless. But then something shifted. Instead of shrinking, I let the anger fuel me. My voice grew louder, clearer, steadier. I explained my project with passion, with confidence I didn't know I had. By the time I finished, the judges were nodding, impressed. And for the first time in my life, I saw admiration in the eyes of strangers. When the results were announced, my name was called in the top 3. The crowd clapped, and for a moment I froze. No one had ever clapped for me before. That sound, it was like medicine for a wound I had carried my whole life. I walked onto the stage, accepted the certificate and prize, and smiled not for the cameras, not for anyone else, but for myself, because I knew this was only the beginning. But victory always comes with consequences. When I returned home with the certificate, my parents were furious. Instead of congratulating me, my father ripped the paper in half, shouting, "This means nothing. You think this will change anything? You are still nothing." My mother laughed like she always did, mocking me, saying I was just pretending to be special. For a moment, their cruelty burned. But then something incredible happened inside me. I didn't break. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, steady and silent, and thought, your voices don't matter anymore. The world outside has already seen me. You can't erase that. After that, opportunities began to open up one after another. My teachers recommended me for workshops and internships. I got access to scholarships that didn't require my parents' approval. People began to notice the girl who once sat alone, silent in the back of the class. Slowly, I was building a new identity, Scarlett, not the broken daughter of cruel parents, but Scarlett, the fighter, the achiever. But as my world expanded, the tension at home grew heavier. My parents hated my success. Every achievement was like a mirror showing them their failure to keep me small. They started watching me more closely, asking more questions, trying to cut off my access to opportunities. But it was too late. The seed they had planted with their cruelty had already grown into roots too deep to destroy. There was one evening that still stays with me. I had just come home from school after receiving a letter about a national-level program I had qualified for. It was the biggest opportunity yet, a chance that could open doors to universities and a career. I wanted to celebrate, but when I stepped inside, my father was waiting. He grabbed the letter from my hands, read it, and his face turned red with rage. He tore it apart and shouted, "You will never leave this house. Do you hear me? Never." My mother stood beside him, smiling, as if she enjoyed watching my dreams being shredded. But this time I didn't stand still. I bent down, picked up the torn pieces of the letter, and said quietly, "You can tear the paper, but you can't stop me." The look on his face was shock. He wasn't used to me talking back. For years, I had been silent, but now my voice was stronger than his threats. That was the moment I realized I had finally outgrown my cage. I taped the torn pieces of the letter back together and hid them in my notebook. The next day, I told my teacher everything, and she promised to help me with the application process in secret. For the first time, I had an ally outside of myself, and that gave me even more strength. As weeks passed, I threw myself deeper into preparation, into learning, into building the life I wanted. My parents still tried to break me, but their words had lost power. They were noise, background static. My focus was sharper than ever. One night, lying awake in my small room, I whispered to myself, "This house is not the end of me. It is the beginning of me." And I knew I was right. The fire inside me was no longer just survival, it was becoming destiny. I was not just preparing to escape anymore. I was preparing to rise so high that even the people who tried to destroy me would be forced to watch. After the night I taped that torn letter back together, I knew my journey had already left my parents' control. They could scream, they could destroy papers, they could laugh in my face, but the truth was, they had lost me. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. My mind was already out of that house, already walking roads they could not follow. Still, I had one last mountain to climb before I could finally break free. The national-level program I had qualified for required travel. It was a week-long camp where students from across the country came together to learn, compete, and build projects. For me, it was more than just a program. It was my ticket out. But to attend, I needed parental permission, at least on paper. When I brought the form home, my father laughed in my face and ripped it without even reading. My mother stood beside him, clapping, calling me a dreamer wasting everyone's time. For a moment, I felt that old sting of helplessness, but then I reminded myself, I wasn't helpless anymore. Next morning, I went straight to my teacher and told her everything. She looked at me, her eyes full of sympathy and fire at the same time. "Don't worry, Scarlett," she whispered. "I'll handle it." And she did. She contacted the program organizers, explained my situation, and somehow managed to get me accepted without needing my parents' signature. For the first time in my life, someone fought for me when I couldn't. That act of kindness became fuel for the fire already burning inside me. The day I left for the camp, I didn't tell my parents. I packed a small bag, slipped out of the house early in the morning, and walked straight to the bus stop. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window at the town I had spent my entire life in, a town filled with memories of pain, silence, and broken dreams. And yet, for the first time, I smiled, because I was finally leaving, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The camp was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. I met students who were passionate, curious, and kind. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I belonged. We worked on projects late into the night, laughed during breaks, and shared stories of our lives. Some of them talked about supportive families and proud parents. I stayed silent during those conversations, my heart heavy, but I didn't envy them. Instead, I reminded myself I had built my strength in fire. My scars were proof of my survival. During the final showcase at the camp, I presented my project to a panel of judges from universities and companies. I spoke with the same confidence I had discovered during the state competition, only stronger this time. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. I stood tall, unafraid, unstoppable. When the results were announced, my project won first place. The applause that followed shook me to my core. For a girl who once stood in silence while her parents mocked her, that sound was everything. It was not just applause, it was freedom. Winning the competition came with a scholarship offer, a full ride to a university far from home. When I held that letter in my hands, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was free. For years, I had been told I had no future, that I was worthless, that I was a burden. But now, I held proof in my hands that every word they had spoken was a lie. Returning home after the camp was like stepping back into a cage, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I walked through the door with my head high, my bag in one hand and the scholarship letter in the other. My father looked at me with suspicion, my mother with her usual mocking smile. I laid the letter on the table and said, "I'm leaving for university. There's nothing you can do to stop me." For a moment, silence filled the room. My father's face turned red, his fists clenched, but I didn't flinch. My mother laughed, but her laughter sounded weaker this time, like she was unsure. They could see it in my eyes. I wasn't their prisoner anymore. The night before I left, I lay in my small bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories of my childhood rushed through my mind, my father smashing my projects, my mother clapping at my pain, the countless nights I cried myself to sleep. But mixed with those memories were the victories, the competitions, the applause, the scholarship letter. Pain and triumph side by side. And I realized something. I didn't hate them anymore. They had tried to destroy me, yes. But in their cruelty, they had forged me into something unbreakable. They had planted the fire that now burned so bright inside me. When the morning came, I picked up my bag, walked out of the house, and didn't look back. My parents shouted, but their voices sounded distant, powerless, like echoes fatting in the wind. I stepped into the car that would take me to my new life, and as the house disappeared from view, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning." University life was not easy, but it was mine. Every challenge, every hardship felt different now because I faced them with freedom. I built friendships, worked on projects, and slowly carved out the life I had always dreamed of. The applause I once longed for became a regular part of my journey, and with each step forward, I carried the scars of my past, not as wounds, but as reminders of where I came from and how far I had risen. Looking back now, I realize my story was never about revenge. It was about survival, transformation, and choosing to rise when everything around me tried to pull me down. My parents thought they could break me, but all they did was build the strongest version of me. So if you are listening to my story, remember this. Pain can either end you or it can forge you. The choice is yours. I chose to rise.